Hey, what's going on, gang? Nate on the Stone here. Welcome back to my channel. Now that we know, practically for certain, that the novel coronavirus came from the innards of a Chinese lab in Wuhan, friendly sentiments toward China, specifically the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, which has ruled China since 1949, that has evaporated faster than goodwill towards a politician. Pundits have stated that China, in their estimation, should be destroyed. Senator Tom Cotton and Congressman Dan Crenshaw have both introduced legislation that would allow everyday Americans to actually sue China in federal court for the death and the economic destruction that the virus has caused. Congressman Jim Banks has argued that China should be forced to pay reparations for the damage that the virus has done to us. And the editors of the online magazine The American Mind suggested that the U.S. should just completely wipe out all the debt that it owes to China, thus punishing China, injecting American wallets with much-needed cash, as well as gain our financial independence from Beijing. These are all bold ideas, and bold ideas are definitely what we need, especially as the world changes right in front of our eyes. But before we dive headfirst into any of these ideas, any of these plans, we need to know exactly what we're getting into and what declaring war, for all intents or purposes, on the CCP would mean. And the first thing that we have to talk about in regards to China is the Chinese economy, which is now second only to the United States. A couple of weeks ago, when I uploaded my video about some of the potential ways that the coronavirus could change the world, I touched briefly on the issue of China and the Chinese economy. But it's such an important subject that it really deserves to be reiterated here. China's economic power comes from it being the world's #1 exporter. In 2019, for example, China exported a grand total of $2.499 trillion with a capital T, dollars around the world. That was a growth of 9.9% since 2015. 49% of these exported goods went to other Asian countries, 20.1% went to North America, and 19.9% went to Europe. Now, what were the Chinese exporting around the world? The #1 export was electrical machines and equipment, $671 billion worth of the stuff. Next came machines including computers, $417 billion. Furniture, bedding, signs, lighting, $99.5 billion. Plastics, $84.4 billion. Vehicles, $74.4 billion. Steel and iron, $69.9 billion. And last but not least, toys and games, coming in at $62.8 billion. Just on the basis of those exports alone, China would be a formidable economic rival. But it goes deeper than that. For example, did you know that China has become, for all intents and purposes, the world's pharmacy, with 90% of the medical production base in the United States and in Europe completely dependent on China? This is because China is the #1 producer of APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, which are the basic building blocks for antibodies as well as other prescription drugs. And as I mentioned a few weeks ago in my aforementioned video, the US is dependent on China for 95% of its ibuprofen, 40 to 45% of its penicillin, and 91% of its hydrocortisone, which is basically used to treat everything from arthritis to blood, hormone, and immune system disorders to cancer and severe allergies. And then there is the tiny, infinitesimal little matter of rare earth elements. According to the website AmericanGoesScience.org, quote, "Rare earth elements, REE, are necessary components of more than 200 products across a wide range of applications, especially high-tech consumer products, such as cellular telephones, computer hard drives, electric and hybrid vehicles, and flat-screen monitors and televisions. Significant defense applications include electronic displays, guidance systems, lasers and radar and sonar systems. Although the amount of REE used in a product may not be a significant part of that product by weight, value, or volume, the REE can be necessary for the device to function. For example, magnets made of REE often represent only a small fraction of the total weight, but without them, the spindle motors and voice coils of desktops and laptops would not be possible. In 1993, 38% of world production of REEs was in China, 33% was in the United States, 12% was in Australia, and 5% each was in Malaysia and India. Several other countries, including Brazil, Canada, South Africa, Sri Lanka, and Thailand, made up the remainder. However, in 2008, China accounted for more than 90% of world production of REEs, and by 2011, China accounted for 97% of world production. And just to add insult to injury, the United States is also dependent on China for 70% of its shoes, and even the sweetener that we use in our Diet Coke. Being the global equivalent of Walmart means that China has a lot of power and a lot of influence everywhere. Just like you don't want to tee off your barber, you do not really want to anger the country that you're dependent on for 90% of your medicine and 97% of your rare earth elements. China has, not surprisingly, taken its economic power and weaponized it, with one of the primary ways that it has done that being the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a 1.3 trillion again with a capital T, intercontinent investment. The BRI has built a web of infrastructure, roads, railways, ports, energy pipelines, and telecommunications all around the world, but particularly in developing countries. And as its name suggests, the BRI is composed of two parts. There's the Silk Road Economic Belt, which is focused on the land, and there's the Maritime Silk Road, which is focused on the sea. The real purpose of the BRI can be gleaned from the phrase Silk Road. By itself, it seems kind of odd, since silk is not one of the things that is being created or traded. The name is a harkening back to the Silk Road, the spiderweb of trade routes that connected the West and the East, from the 2nd century BC all the way up until the 18th century. In a very real way, it connected the entire world with China. The BRI today has the same goal. Beijing has constantly iterated that the BRI is a win-win situation for everyone. It allows Beijing to export more of its goods and services to the world, thus keeping its population employed and its economy humming, while at the same time allowing countries to take out low-interest loans for their own development. And to be clear, these are very tempting offers, since BRI money doesn't seem to come with nearly as many strings as other funds offered by such organizations as the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank. But the nature of the world is that no matter how good a deal may seem, eventually you always have to pay the piper. Many countries which have accepted the honey of BRI money have fallen prey to the accurately termed Chinese debt trap, with a sterling example being Sri Lanka. In 2010, China invested $1.5 billion into a Sri Lankan port in the village of Hambantota, after the Indian government flatly refused to help Sri Lanka, saying that the project was untenable. New Delhi's position was actually justified when the port sat neglected for years, while Sri Lanka's debt continued to balloon. But unfortunately, by that time, it was already too late. And in December of 2017, Sri Lanka, in a desperate attempt to pay off some of its debt, ceded the port over to Beijing. Not only did this give the CCP a foothold in Sri Lanka, but it also gave the Chinese another access point to a key shipping route, as well as giving it a prominent presence in what had, up to that point, traditionally been India's sphere of influence. This is an extreme example, but several other countries have also fallen prey to the debt trap, usually in the form of corruption, loss of financial independence as well as sovereignty, and encouragement to back Beijing's positions. And it's not just developing countries that are at risk. Take, for example, Germany. Bilateral trade relations between Germany and China resulted in 200 billion euros just in 2018, which has translated to a lot of prosperity for a lot of Germans. But it has also made Germany extremely reliant upon China. German auto companies like VW and BMW, to give one example, are almost completely reliant on Chinese business. They rely on Chinese sales more than US sales for their continued prosperity. But at the same time, Germany is also almost completely reliant on China for raw materials that it needs for its auto industries. For example, cobalt, for car batteries, meaning that Germany has gotten itself into a vicious circle, relying on China for the raw materials that it needs for its auto industry, and then relying on the Chinese to actually buy the cars that it produces. This, unsurprisingly, has shaped the reactions of the German government, which, for example, did not protest as loudly as other countries when Beijing cracked down on pro-democracy demonstrations in Hong Kong, or when the world was made aware of the concentration camps that the Chinese have built for the Muslim Uyghurs. On top of all this, China has also expended a vast amount of time, energy, and money into sinking its hooks into international organizations. As the Trump administration has moved to cut U.S. funding to the UN, for example, China has upped its game in this regard. Beijing is now the second largest contributor to the UN, providing 12% of the UN's funds. With 2,500 men, China also has provided more peacekeepers to the UN Security Council than the other 4 permanent members, US, UK, France, and Russia, combined. And this new influence has definitely paid off with, for example, China just being announced to the UN's Human Rights Council. This in spite of the aforementioned pro-democracy crackdowns in concentration camps. And we all know by now that the World Health Organization, a facet of the UN itself, was much more keen to protect Beijing and repeat China's talking points about the coronavirus than it was actually promoting the health of the world. This honestly isn't surprising when you realize that the head of WHO, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, was put into that position with the backing and blessing of China, even though Tedros was a senior member of Ethiopia's repressive regime. A repressive regime that was backed by, surprise of all surprises, Beijing. All of this has just been skimming on the surface, but it should be enough to show you that China isn't some poor country cousin on the world stage. It is a formidable opponent, which must be taken seriously even on its worst day. But you might be desperately saying to the screen, now is the perfect time to strike! Americans have finally woken up to the dangers of Chinese economic dominance. Foreign governments are starting to turn against it. The Foreign Minister of Australia stated that China should be forced to pay reparations for the virus. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has proposed a $2 billion plan that would be used to bring Japanese businesses back to Japan. Even the UK and Germany, the Germans, are turning against the CCP. Strike while the iron is hot. Not to be Johnny Raincloud or anything, but
that's not good enough!
Let's just say, for argument's sake, that the US and the UK and Australia all demanded reparations from Beijing for the virus. What do you think is going to be the CCP's reaction to that demand? And what'll happen if the West, even collectively, insists upon its demands? With a snap of its collective communist red-stained fingers, China could completely cut off the APIs and the rare earth elements that the West is completely dependent on. That would mean not only no more smartphones and laptops, but also no more national defense, national security, and no more medicine. And no, the West couldn't just turn around and start producing these things again. Rosemary Gibson, a senior advisor with the Hastings Center Bioethics Institute, says that right now at this moment, the US has zero, repeat that again, zero capacity to even make basic drugs to fight off the coronavirus. And while the US could start mining rare earth elements again and export them to the rest of the West, you can't really do that overnight. This goes double when you take into account the environmental laws that would have to be changed, which in turn would require overcoming the adamant opposition that is guaranteed to come from the environmental movement, as well as the American Progressive Bloc in general. And you can't do that in a single day. Well, we could force them! I'll send flowers. It's true that the US and the West could feasibly win a shooting war with China, but it would cost a lot of time, blood, and treasure. Because China has required foreign companies to divulge technical secrets of the company's home countries, in order for those companies to gain access to Chinese markets, China has rapidly developed militarily. It's gotten to the point, actually, that in January of 2019, in an unclassified report, the Pentagon admitted that in some areas, China's military power surpasses that of the United States. This leads to another point. The Chinese probably know a hell lot more about us and our capacities than we do about them. Over the past few decades, the Chinese have upped their espionage game, perfecting tried and true methods that they've used now to turn US citizens, especially former intelligence operatives, against their own country. What's even more, China has also recruited Chinese students studying in American universities to spy for the CCP. According to CNN, which did a whole story of this last February, quote, Beijing is leaning on expatriate Chinese scientists, business people, and students like Xi, one of roughly 350,000 from China who study in the US every year, to gain access to anything and everything in American universities and companies that's of interest to Beijing, according to current and former US intelligence officials, lawmakers, and several experts. While it remains unclear just how many of these students are on the radar of law enforcement, current and former intelligence officials told CNN that they all remain tethered to the Chinese government in some way, even if the vast majority aren't sent to the US to spy. It's part of a persistent, aggressive Chinese effort to undermine American industries, steal American secrets, and eventually diminish American influence in the world so that Beijing can advance its own agenda. Rather than having trained spies attempt to infiltrate US universities and businesses, Chinese intelligence services have strategically utilized members of its own student population to act as access agents or covert influencers, according to Joe Augustine, a former CIA officer with first-hand knowledge of the issue from his time at the agency. Oh, and don't think for a second that the Chinese are just relying on human agents to spy on US secrets. Back in October 2018, Bloomberg News published a bombshell. The story revealed that Chinese state operatives had corrupted computer hardware, placing microchips no bigger than a grain of rice on motherboards. This quote, "allow the attackers to create a stealth doorway into any network that included the altered machines." The ongoing government investigation revealed that this cyber attack affected 30 different companies, including a major bank, government contractors, and even Apple. Now, just how bad and impressive was this cyber attack? The Bloomberg News piece quotes a hardware hacker named Joe Grand, and he said, quote, "having a well-done nation-state level hardware implant surface would be like witnessing a unicorn jumping over a rainbow." But, as the piece goes on to say, that is exactly what the US investigation found. So yeah, it's safe to say that the Chinese know a hell lot more about us than we do about them. Oh, and we know plenty of stuff that's scary, because guess what? The coronavirus wasn't the only thing that the CCP was cooking up in their state-run labs. In 2011, it was revealed that China had a herd of 39 goats, which possessed human-style blood and internal organs. A little Frankenstein experiment done by injecting goat embryos with human stem cells. In 2018, Dr. Jianko He of the Southern University of Science and Technology announced that he had genetically modified 2 twin human girls. What else do the Chinese have up their sleeves? Well, I'm sure that in the eventuality of an actual shooting war, they would be more than eager to show us. If you've made it to this far in the video, you're probably asking yourself, okay, Nate, what is the moral of this exceedingly long and very depressing story? Well, the moral is twofold. First, Beijing doesn't just need to be held to account for the coronavirus. It needs to be brought to heel. It is a national disgrace that we were stupid enough to think that capitalism in and of itself would be enough to make the CCP disappear and to turn the Chinese, an ancient and proud culture, into our little lackey and toady, all so very happy to be used as a cheap source of labor for the West. But, moral number 2.
It will take dedication, it will take time.
Time that we need to wean ourselves off of the dependency we have on China right now for our APIs and REEs. Time to do whatever is necessary to clean our house when it comes to Chinese spies in our businesses and in our universities. Even if that means forbidding Chinese students from studying here in the United States. That in turn is going to require a shift in our mentality, a realization that we are in a new Cold War with Beijing and have been for decades. We were just pretty much asleep at the wheel. This in turn will give us the opportunity to juice up our own military away from the CCP's prying eyes. Time too to do maybe the hardest thing on the list. Rediscovering what America stands for. Say what you want about the CCP, but it knows without a shadow of a doubt what it is, what it stands for, and what it wants. Can Americans honestly say the same thing? I would say no. In a culture awash with moral therapeutic deism and atomistic individualism, we've lost any sense of a national vision outside of maybe perhaps a very hazy "America is number one, baby" sort of mentality, which, let's be honest, doesn't keep you at the number one spot and it doesn't win wars. More important than anything else is going to be rediscovering our purpose and regaining our strength. Physically, morally, intellectually. Because ultimately, that is the only thing that is going to stop Beijing. But as usual, what say you? What are some steps that we, collectively, can start taking for the inevitable confrontation with Beijing and the CCP? As always, let me know your thoughts, ideas, and opinions in the comment box below. Well, that about wraps up everything for right now, gang. As always, if you liked the video, whether you agreed with me or not, don't forget to show your support by giving it a like and sharing it with your friends on social media. And if you like videos about the culture, politics, and religion, but from a unique POV, then subscribe to the channel and ring the bell for notifications so that you will always know when I post new videos like this every week. As always, thank you for watching, for giving me a little bit of your day. And thank you to everyone who has already subscribed to my channel. I appreciate you all. In the meantime, gang, until next time, stay dangerous, and don't forget to read, think, speak, write. I'll talk to you soon. Ciao.